6 Grand Prix wins, 34 podiums and 3 pole positions, 253 starts and 1,441 points. Sergio Perez's Formula 1 career has now spanned over a decade, and he's made a huge impact in the sport. From an up-and-coming young star with sponsorship backing from Mexico's richest man, a rear gunner in Red Bull's epic 2021 title charge, and now a driver under pressure in the media. Beyond anything else, and heading into the Mexican Grand Prix this weekend, Sergio Perez is a Mexican motorsport icon. So for this video, we're going to talk all about Sergio Perez's past, his present, and the future of that Red Bull second seat that has inevitably drawn so much attention in the media this year. And we start our story in Guadalajara, Mexico, where Sergio grew up is one of the cultural centres of Mexico and the home of tequila, something which has surely made a dent in both the livers and the catering budget of Red Bull since his addition to the team. But for Sergio to pursue motorsport to the level that he wanted to, and the level that his talent was worthy of, it required a bit more money. And Sergio's relationship with the billionaire Carlos Slim goes all the way back to 2002 when he was 12 back in Mexico. And Carlos Slim's massive net worth of $96 billion makes Lawrence Stroll's measly $3.9 billion look woefully middle class. And it was that money, that funding from Carlos's businesses that took Sergio beyond racing in America to Europe and the higher categories. In 2007, Sergio competed in series like A1GP or British Formula 3 and then graduated onto GP2 from there. And essentially all you need to know from this is that his junior career followed the pattern of a driver destined for Formula 1, with both the talent and sponsorship to keep continually graduating through the categories and catch the attention of the Ferrari Driver Academy. And interestingly enough, in 2009, that year in GP2, Sergio competed with the Arden team, a team that was first founded as an outfit to allow Christian Horner to compete back in Formula 3000. And if you watched our last video, you'll know that that was the first time where Christian ran into Helmut Marko, who was running the Red Bull Junior team at the time. When Marko noticed Horner's talent running Arden, he was then picked for the Red Bull team principal role in 2005. In 2009, while Sergio was racing with Arden, Red Bull were well on their way to race wins and challenging for titles, building a team and a car that was ready to compete at the top of the field in 2010. For Sergio's career though, the graduation to Formula 1 came in 2011 when he joined the Ferrari engine Sauber team as a Mexican wonderkind. Still sponsored by Carlos and fueled by the Ferrari Driver Academy, this was a new young driver joining Formula 1 with plenty of hype behind him and the pride of Latin America, all willing him on towards success. And on his debut at the Australian Grand Prix in 2011, Sergio finished P7. Points on your debut is always impressive, but what was also so cool was the way that he did it. He was the only driver in the entire field that didn't stop twice. Running the entire race on a one-stopper was a theme that was to come for Sergio, with his time in the midfield teams earning him notoriety as a tyre whisperer, someone that could make alternate strategies work through their own skill, their understanding, being able to drive very specific, very tailored setups, and get the most out of the cars to beat their rivals on super tight margins in unorthodox ways. But I don't really want to do an entire career retrospective on Sergio Perez here, so I'm going to skip to the points that I need to make for this video, and avoid simply reading off Wikipedia for the entire runtime. So if we zoom through the Sauber years, we'll skip past a massive shunt in Monaco 2011 and a heroic podium drive in 2012 at Malaysia. And I think it is definitely worth touching on that race. I mean, remembering that Sergio Perez was battling with Fernando Alonso for the lead in that race, finishing ahead of Lewis Hamilton in that fast-charging 2012 McLaren. He did everything right to bring home a huge points haul for Sauber back then. Points were so valuable in the championship for a team like that, and for Sergio to do that, establish his reputation further as a reliable, dependable driver that could compete near the top of the field when the car allowed him to. And to compete in the midfield for so long in Formula 1, to earn a reputation above the younger rookies, to keep your seat for so many years and be able to handle the crashes, the disappointment, the low stakes effort, not being able to compete for wins like you wanted to when you first joined the sport, to stay in and find ways to deliver value through all those times, all those different technical eras, all the different people around you. Sergio Perez did exactly what he needed to do again to stay in the sport through those years. So a reliable driver like that can get you over the edge is a valuable asset. And you combine that with his Mexican sponsorship money, his marketability following F1's return to Mexico in 2016, and his dependability in the seat. And you combine all of this, you've got a really brilliant driver in Sergio Perez, one that's going to be wanted by plenty of teams, right? But if we cut forward through Sergio Perez's career, it was about halfway through 2020 when we found out that Sergio Perez was going to be without a seat for 2021. At that time, plenty of people in the press and in leadership positions within the sport were very vocal about it. The idea that you could have these rookie pay drivers still joining Formula 1, but Sergio Perez leaving, was a sign that the economics of the sport were failing in its ability to keep drivers like Sergio around. And it was right in the middle of all that chatter that Perez's brightest moment in the sport came. The 2020 Sakir Grand Prix. Many many of you will remember, Sergio Perez won his first race in Formula 1, making him Formula 1's 110th race winner. It was a race in which Perez was hit by Leclerc, who also hit Verstappen in an accident that sent both Leclerc and Max out of that race. Sergio was able to keep going, that iconic radio message when he's trying to figure out if his car still works driving out of the barriers. Oh, Sergio, brilliant, your car still works, let's see if we can get back up into the points. But little did he know, with the raw pace that he had in that Mercedes engine racing point, he was going to make it not just back into the points, not just back into the podium, but all the way to the front of the field in a crazy race where we saw George Russell replacing a COVID-stricken Lewis Hamilton. All the action that took place at that Sakir Grand Prix, Russell's overtake on Bottas, falling away from the podium, Sergio Perez coming all the way through from last on the grid to lead to win what he thought was his only ever Formula 1 race and his penultimate ever Formula 1 race start. What an incredible day it was, and it was a day that caught the attention of Red Bull when they were considering whether to keep Alex Albon around for next year or to look elsewhere. And I think that's also one thing that's really important to remember here. While at the moment people are thinking Sergio's a victim of Red Bull's ruthless ways, he was the beneficiary of them back in 2020 when they were equally harsh and critical of Alex Albon looking to replace him. And that incredible victory in Sakir was the first win for a Mexican driver since Pedro Rodriguez won the Belgian Grand Prix 50 years prior. I mean, what a moment, right? And to some, Pedro Rodriguez of the Rodriguez brothers will be a familiar name. Now forgive me for the tangent folks, but I think the fact that until this day, the elder of the two brothers, Ricciardo, still stands as Ferrari's youngest ever race driver at just over 19 is pretty awesome, although his early loss from racing at age 20 was just as tragic as his debut was brilliant. But like I said, and like many of you know, it was that win for Perez that really put him on the Red Bull radar, and eventually after Abu Dhabi that year, the announcement was made that he'd be joining Red Bull Racing for 2021. And it turned out that given the pace of the car in 2021 and Max's pace that year, his closeness to Lewis Hamilton, that Sergio Perez was going to be critically important, just like Valtteri Bottas was going to be critically important to allowing both of their team's main drivers to compete successfully for the title, doing things like running alternate strategies to intentionally get in the way of someone else, to sacrifice your own race for the potential of taking points away from Mercedes or giving more points to Max. That was the value that Sergio was able to bring, and knowing the position he was in with Red Bull where they reached out to him, offered him a drive in a time where it looked like he was going to be kicked out of Formula 1 to then give him a drive in a championship-worthy team, he knew what he had to do for them was repay them in any way he could and have no selfishness, no ego in his drive to only serve the team. And that's exactly what he did. At least for most of 2021, he was a really key asset to Red Bull and did, when it came down to it, in moments like Turkey and moments like Abu Dhabi, he delivered the value that he was brought into the team to do. And then eventually in 2021, as you well know, largely due to the assistance of Nicholas Latifi in some pretty controversial race direction, Verstappen would go on to win the title that year. Sergio Perez's big job of help Max win was done, and if he was a little faster, maybe it wouldn't have gone all the way down to the last lap of the last race of the year, but hey, he was adapting to the big leagues and he seemed to adapt pretty well, even taking home a win that year after Max punctured out of the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. And then in the following season, last year, Sergio missed out on P2 in the standings to Charles Leclerc by only 3 points, and in the final round they shared the podium with Charles in second and Sergio in third to cement that result. Of course, last year he took wins in Monaco and Singapore, but with Max so far in the lead, the attention in the media then went on to who could challenge it. And intuitively, people were thinking, well, Sergio's got the same equipment as Max, he can't be that far off, right? But last year in the World Championship, Sergio finished 149 points behind Max Verstappen, and this year the margin's 226. This year we've seen, of course, the notorious run of weak qualifyings. It seemed to be over as we got to the midpoint. There was some regression to the mean involved, but the mean that he was regressing to was not as high as we'd previously seen, and his comeback was nothing compared to his comeback drive in Sakir 2020. It's pretty obvious that both his seat security and the level of media criticism are proportional to his performances in Formula 1. If he was faster, we wouldn't be making this video. But alongside the weak on-track performances, the negative press has surrounded Perez this year. Some of it is his own team's doing, like Helmut Marko's notorious Austrian TV interview, in which for some reason in the middle of complimenting Perez's return to form at the Italian Grand Prix, he drew unfounded and needless connections between his nationality and his level of concentration to Formula 1. And I think luckily enough for Red Bull, the last 2 years Verstappen hasn't really needed Sergio at all in the World Championship, which then makes you think what the purpose of that second Red Bull seat is going to be. If they get into a tight championship challenge again, it's very difficult to see how the Sergio Perez of this year could be adding any value to them. So maybe it's time to get a new young driver in that seat, or someone else. Or of course many draw attention to the return of Daniel Ricciardo, how often we see him in Red Bull gear and not AlphaTauri gear, how often he's treated as a third driver, potentially getting promoted to a second driver now within that Red Bull team. A lot has been made of Sergio Perez finishing P2 in the championship this year. He's currently got it. He's currently got a slightly increased margin following Lewis Hamilton's disqualification in the USA. Red Bull say that clause doesn't exist to say that Sergio Perez's contract for next year doesn't directly hinge on him getting that P2 in the championship. And like a lot of the rumours in the paddock, it's very hard to tell between which ones are real and which ones are not. But what is pretty obvious and what has been made clear again in the media is how important that P2 is to Red Bull. It may not hinge directly on whether he's going to get it, but it'll be a huge part of the conversation. And if he doesn't get it, it would be a rather significant blemish on what has been an otherwise pretty perfect year for Red Bull. Not closing in on that P2 in what is effectively the most dominant car of the modern turbo hybrid era would be a huge embarrassment for them. To say that you haven't been able to get a driver in the right place to be able to do that when he's getting that difference made up by a better driver at a different team, it makes them look a little foolish, right? And Christian Horner, of course, directly denied that P2 clause in the media this week, and Sergio Perez has really been a bit all over the place, trying to give non-answers or non-sequiturs in press conferences because he's constantly getting asked about his security within the team, what's real, what's not. He's never ever going to give the true details of his contract. Why would they ever really give that to the media? So it's always going to be very hard to tell. Unfortunately for the Formula 1 fans, the patience that we're going to have to show here to wait and see what happens with Sergio is not what we want to see. So instead, let's talk about the future of that Red Bull seat. Who could replace Sergio if he does go, either in 24 or in 25? I think for the remainder of this year, if he's able to keep the car on the road and avoid reliability DNFs, then P2 is firmly within his hands. And if he isn't able to do that with the margin that he's currently got in the points table and the equipment that he's got underneath him, I think you can start to empathise a little bit with Red Bull when they start looking elsewhere. The margin that he's currently got to Lewis is 39 points, and that could be exactly the difference between him staying in Formula 1 for next year and him having to leave the sport. We're heading to Mexico this weekend, anticipating grandstands full of fans waiting, dreaming of a Sergio Perez victory in front of the home crowd. That would be truly, truly epic, and what we can expect to see probably is Sergio Perez back on the podium again, celebrating with his dad and his son, enjoying the entire family atmosphere and the energy that the Latin American Grand Prix bring to Formula 1. But then, of course, after Mexico, we head to Brazil, to the Sao Paulo circuit, which was the site last year of one of the worst moments within that Red Bull garage, as Max refused to give position back to Sergio at the end of the race. And what was rumoured that was because Sergio had allegedly intentionally crashed to hold on to the pole position in Monaco that year and went on to win the Grand Prix, Max was then unable to trust Sergio to give anything back to him when he was able to resort to those means to be able to hold Max away from a win in Monaco. We'll have to wait and see how that turns out, whether the heat starts to boil over again. We saw last weekend just how feisty Max can be, even though he's already got the title wrapped up, he's already got all the records, but talking in the braking zone, being annoying on the radio, having the car not working perfectly, fighting for any points paying position is something that's going to get Max Verstappen fired up. And if you get in the way of that, you're going to feel the fire, and Sergio may have to do exactly that if he's going to try and search for a win in the remaining races of this year. But as we're focusing on the Red Bull driver market for this video, we have to round out by talking about replacements. Daniel Ricciardo is now back from his hand injury, and if he can fully recover from that by the end of the year, beat Yuki Tsunoda, get in the points multiple times, he might be able to draw the best out of himself and in turn catch the same attention from Red Bull that he was able to draw at that Silverstone test. Of course, many people here will be expecting me to say Lando Norris, he's the next future for Red Bull. He's great mates with Max Verstappen, he's got the natural talent, it's time for him to graduate to a factory outfit. But I think the loudness, the volume of those shouts for Lando to join Red Bull was so much louder at the start of the year when McLaren weren't able to deliver even a points-paying car. Now they've got a car that's consistently on the podium. Lando feels challenged, pushed by his teammate, but it's not a negative relationship. It's one that allows them both to be able to consistently draw the team up in the constructor standings, and it's probably going to get them to finish P4 this year. So unless McLaren go on to completely reverse their ways next year and start slow again, I can't see that Lando move happening for a few years down the line. What I would do if I was in charge, if I was Horner and I wanted to do the possibly most Red Bull thing, the craziest option to really shake up the news and create headlines, I would stick Liam Lawson in the car, right? If Red Bull are as confident as they seem to be about next year's car being even more dominant, even faster, and as confident as they also are in Max to be able to basically win a title on his own, I would follow what Eddie Jordan says. Why not put Liam in the car? You might have a potential chance at creating the next Sebastian Vettel, the next Daniel Ricciardo the next Max Verstappen. Throwing him in at the deep end didn't really work with Albon, but who's going to say it's not going to work with Liam? So what do you think about all of this? Let me know in the comments. What would you do if you were the Red Bull team principal? Who would you put in the car, and what crazy move would you do to shake up the market? So I'll leave you with that, and for now I'll say thank you very much for watching. Make sure to subscribe to this channel to get weekly motorsport updates from us, and check out crash.net for coverage across the racing world.